Hello YouTube, this is Stich reaching out. Tonight I'm going to talk a bit about Daniel Casolaro. I have a rant about that. I have a couple of videos with eerie music and slideshow type format about Danny, a journalist who allegedly killed himself back in, I believe, 1991. Ken Thomas and the late Jim Keith had an interesting book about it, as well as Gordon Thomas and former Israeli intelligence operative Ari Ben-Menashe. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Those are among the interesting books about Danny, a journalist who was looking into the Inslaw case, and BCCI, which was the Bank of Commerce Credit International out of Pakistan, a bank that was liquidated, I believe, also in 1991. He was found dead in a Virginia hotel room, as all great journalists should be, I guess. It is one of the most spectacular stories. He was working on Inslaw, which involved something called the PROMIS software as well. He had contacts with a brilliant guy named Michael Riconosciuto, or Michael R. I can't pronounce his name. That was allegedly paid to construct a backdoor for it. This software called PROMIS, which is well known to not Fortran, but conspiracy researchers or whatever, or people who read about espionage or related topics. But this software was a game changer. It could track anything. Hamilton, a gentleman by the name of Hamilton, was the developer. I think his wife worked on it with him as well. He learned a lot in Vietnam, or was working for the NSA in Vietnam, and he developed this incredible software that could track anything about an enemy, down to the shoelaces that each soldier might have, or if you were using a surveillance thing, it could tell you how much water is being used, or records about anybody. And he was going to sell it to the justice system, because at the time I guess they didn't have something that could track all the cases and criminals and whatnot. And this thing, though, it was good. The intelligence community saw that it would be an immense weapon, and extremely useful. Again, a game changer. So he was working on that case. The reason why the company of Inslaw, that was owned by Mr. Hamilton and his wife, was interesting, because he was going to sell that again to the different parties, Justice Department, whatever. And to make a long story short, there was basically the Reagan administration's, or elements of it, wanted to pressure him into it, and they wanted to lift it off him. And so that was a case, and he was represented by his name escapes me, Elliot Richardson, Mr. Elliot Richardson, who was also involved in the Nixon affair, because he had been wronged. But there was a whole thing, and it was going to be back engineered at a Indian reservation, and involving the Wackenut security was involved there as well, I believe. I'm probably gonna vlog about this later, but basically, Indian reservations are kind of have been used by government black operations because they're kind of nebulous. They're part of the United States, but they're really not. And there's a woman, I'm going to leave her name in the line notes, I forget her name, but her dad ended up getting wind of some of this, or getting involved, and he got killed. And this brave woman never gave up. She went after the guys and basically got at least one of them, or one of the killers, and won a court case years later. So she was just a young kid when her dad got killed on the Carbazon, I believe. I got the name pronounced wrong. I have to leave a lot of this in the line of notes. The pronunciation. And Danny Casolaro had as a contact Michael Rosa. Again, I can't pronounce the fellow's name. Very fascinating guy, aka Danger Man, as one of his contacts. But he had a lot of other contacts in the intelligence community of all types. And he was working on what he referred to as the Octopus, which was like a blend of the black operatives, intelligence agencies of every kind, organized crime units, complete, octopus, just like the Spectre movie, right? The octopus, and it's just all powerful elements of it. Both Democrat and Republican Party people involved, whatnot, but organized crime of all types, and he hooked up with a guy I believe named Robert Booth Nichols, and there was another guy that was a contact of his that he was warning him not to meet certain people regarding this, and he was just about to meet with a source about the Inslaw and BCCI he was working on, and that was a huge bank some people suspect of being the black bank or a black bank of the CIA. And then he allegedly killed himself, which is mysterious. I'm not going to go into the detail of how they found him and this and that. That's in the book that I'll leave in liner notes. Gordon Thomas is a guy who writes a lot about intelligence. He writes a lot about the British MI6 and MI5 and CIA, and a lot about the Israeli Mossad and so forth. And he would go on years later to write a book about the British newspaper mogul Robert Maxwell, who became, he alleged, a guy who sold the PROMIS software worldwide, and I believe both the Israelis and the Americans who work on this, and they both used a backdoor technique. So I think Maxwell was working in conjunction with both the U.S. intelligence and the Israeli Mossad. And he sold it worldwide, according to Thomas and Ari Ben-Menashe, who has his own book, Prophets of War. And the Gordon Thomas book is called Maxwell Super Spy. So he had the talent and the connections, and Maxwell sold this stuff worldwide with a back door on it, so everybody could get spied on. Maxwell himself would later on get in hot water, owing a lot of money. I think Thomas alleged that he threatened the Israeli intelligence, and then he wound up drowned off his massive yacht. Certainly is suspicious, and highly probable, given that he's kind of a shady dude, and he knew too much probably, and then he ran out of cash. He was pilfering the pension fund of his newspapers that he owned, and that type of thing. So it certainly could be possible. Gordon Thomas is a dramatic writer, but his stuff is, pretty lucid overall. The Jim Keith, Ken Thomas book was an earlier one, and it didn't get into that angle as much. So Gordon Thomas's books came out later, were much larger and so forth. And then he was able to draw on Ari Ben-Menashe, the former Mossad agent, as a source as well. The BCCI, which liquidated and collapsed in 1991, is the subject of a movie called The International, which I highly recommend, with Clive Owen and attractive Naomi Watts, I think her name is, from Mulholland Drive and all that. Clive Owen. It's a really, not your typical action movie with just based solely on car chases and incredible shootouts. Solely. It has at the backdrop of this idea of a super international bank, which the uh, the after part of the movie where the directors talk about how they were inspired by the real bank is actually as interesting as the movie as itself, which said that the intelligence agencies did in fact develop this super bank, which funded both the Contras and the Sandinistas and Manuel Noriega. You know, John Major, the Bushes, everybody was involved with BCCI as a private entity to do off the book operations of all types, and it had the cover of being a third world bank of Pakistan, and they'd say, hey, you know, any criticism of this is you guys in England and Europe, the United States, you know, don't criticize this. This is a bank developed by, you know, poorer people, or if you will, or Muslim people, or whatnot, or you know, it's about time that we had something. You know, it was that type of thing. Like it had that cover, you know, of being like, hey, you know, let us get in on banking, whatnot. We're Pakistan, whatever. And in reality, the name of the gentleman that was the front man, Mr. Abidi, was just a front man, and it was. There's another book, I'll leave the liner notes in there, that talks about how Adhim Karmel of the Saudi intelligence was working on it, and all these different characters, and it was huge. I mean, talk about, you know, when Sherlock Holmes does battle against Moriarty, this sort of said Moriarty has a web of everywhere of crime. That's BCCI was like that. If you don't believe in the world being interconnected, or the underworld being interconnected, check out BCCI. Come on, it's everybody was in on it. Huge. When it finally collapsed, it was said by I think Time magazine that it was as bad as an earthquake or a tsunami. I mean, really bad. That kind of cash flow being liquidated, and what better way to run intelligence operations and do shady stuff than have a super black bank with branches everywhere. It was the successor to banks like the Nugan Bank, which I made another slideshow about. I'm going to talk about that another time, and BCCI separately. But you can see why people think it's suspicious that Daniel Casolaro didn't kill himself. In fact, I believe his brother said he was the kind of guy that was afraid of going for a shot at the doctor, or give blood or anything like that. Tenacious journalist. It's like the guy who conveniently killed himself. Webb, James Webb, when he was writing about the cocaine and the CIA and stuff, to kill the messenger or whatever. Dark alliance with the Contras and Sandinistas and the cocaine, and all of a sudden they drum him out of his job and said, well, he got depressed and killed himself. I don't know. He was working with Freeway, or Ricky Ross, or I believe his name was, and they were just, the crack cocaine era was developed, and the need to fund the Contras was opening a back door to a lot of plausible deniability denied operations where cash was flowing. Needless to say, my point about these things that a lot of people don't talk about is I think they were a lot bigger than even these banks are. There was another one, Bishop Baldwin, that Mr. Ronald Rewald, which Rodney Stich has a cool book on him. I think I'm the only person who's ever done attempted to do a video about him. I did one with the Hawaii, and I've got pictures of Rewald and this and that. Who was a friend of the guy from Hawaii Five-0. So these kind of things are often more interesting than fictional stories. but I think Bishop, Baldwin, and Wong, or Dillingham and Wong, or Ronald Rewald's bank came about after, when the Nguyen Han guys got busted. So there was Nguyen Han, then later on, then the BCCI thing was way huger than all that. I mean, Clark Clifford, who had been a huge Washington figure, was involved in BCCI. Atwood, the attorney for it, there was a sensational trial. He's a very successful attorney, the husband of Wonder Woman, the very attractive Linda Carter. And he, after a sensational trial, nothing happened to him. And he was one of the attorneys for BCCI. Robertson Stevens, I think, was associated with it, and other guys, other whales, big shots. I highly recommend that movie, by the way, again, with the International with Clive Owen. But Danny Casolaro was basically the lead guy on this stuff, and it must have been quite interesting for him to delve into the thing that he called the Octopus, because he was working on the premiere stories at the time. There's an odd quote-unquote conspiracy theory, and I don't know if there's anything to it, that Abby Hoffman, the famous 60s radical, was going to do an article on the PROMIS software for Playboy or something like that, and he passed away suddenly. But that, I don't know. Danny Casolaro is, in this regard, a lot more likely that there was something awry, some malfeasance involved in the untimely death of Casolaro, who seemed like a cool kind of guy. And he was working on the Octopus. I think I'm one of the few that also has some stuff on Nguyen Han. I do apologize to the author, Mr. Butt, who wrote a good book about that. I want to vlog about that another time separately. Nguyen Han, the Australian Black Bank. He was all over that. That's a great book, by the way. I'll leave the name of his book in the line of notes again, as it escapes me, but I put it in there. I think he was part of the author of that book, on hand of Nguyen Han Bank, John Hand. Frank Nguyen was found dead with the business card of William Colby from a gunshot wound to the head in his Mercedes, I believe. And Hand of the Nguyen Han Bank escaped, and I think they just found him a year or two ago in Idaho somewhere with a beard. Very weird case. These cases are way stranger. BCCI and PROMIS software. People who are making fun of you for talking about quote-unquote conspiracy stuff often are correct in calling you a kook for getting too into it. On the other hand, if you look into things such as Nguyen Han Bank, BCCI, and the death of journalist Danny Casolaro, who was onto something and knew what he was doing, and then killing himself and being found in a Virginia hotel. Some of these things have something to it and some don't, but these stories are much more intense in a lot of ways than fictional movies. But sometimes that's the only way to gain access to them quickly, is to watch a fictional movie like The International with Clive Owen. I got a little slideshow action thing on that too. And again, I think I'm the only person who's got a Ronald Rewald and a P2 propaganda video as well. But again, I reach out to that author. Sorry about that, Mr. Budd. I didn't mean anything. I think it's buy it. I made it. I I like your book, and the Nugan is worthwhile. Hopefully going to blog more about that and a part 2 on Daniel Casolaro, but I thought I'd just try to get into it tonight. The Gordon Thomas book, Ari Ben-Menashe, is well worth checking out. Maxwell, Super Spy, and the Octopus. I'm going to leave the names of these books in the liner notes and information about Danny, but this is part 1 about Daniel Casolaro. I want to vlog about him again. Again, he was into the Inslaw case and BCCI, and he was breaking a story on it probably at a wrong time. Gordon Thomas writes about it. I think he sort of said was rough on Danny, saying maybe he was wrong to meet this source or whatever. There's another. There's a woman who wrote a book called The Last Circle, which includes that young, or at the time very young, Native American woman who tenaciously went after this case, the murder case of her dad. The Last Circle. That's another good one. I'm gonna talk about this brave woman again in another thing. I think I reached out to her at some point in my early years of YouTube. And that's really cool that she kept in there and, didn't give up and went after that case. So this is part 1 of Daniel Casolaro Rant. It's a lot of interesting stuff. I will leave the information in the liner notes. Tell me what you think. Do you know more? What parts have I got wrong about this? Yeah. I will leave my own action videos as well in the liner notes. Don't miss the liner notes of this YouTube. Leave me some comments below in there. I'll have the name of that book on Nugan Hand, everything on Daniel Casolaro that I've read in the liner notes, the names of the fictional movie as well, in case you're interested. Give me a shout. I hope you like what I'm saying, other than just talking about CERN. And peace out. God bless. Take care.